All right, the 4150 and the 4180. What is the difference between these two? This is a video that I've kind of been looking forward to making ever since we brought the 4150 home over there. So we will try to highlight some of the differences in history and stuff right after this. Welcome back. If you haven't seen my videos before, I'm Rouse the Oliver Man, and these are the first two articulated tractors that White Motor Company offered, you know, as silver and gray models, I guess we should say. And when you look at the two side by side, they physically look, you know, almost identical. And I would say from a distance, you wouldn't be able to tell which from which. So we're gonna sort this out, but probably first would be good to do a slight bit of history. And I tried to make some notes here so I don't totally butcher everything. But we need to go back a little bit in time. See, Oliver never offered a Charles City built articulated four-wheel drive tractor. The tractors that they sold, a 2455 and a 2655, were both built by Minneapolis Moline. And they were the vision of engineer Mike Verhulst. I hope I'm saying that right. The Moline people can correct me. And I've seen plenty of pictures, and there's stuff on YouTube about him if you want to look that up. He just passed away a few years back. But anyway, he was the vision for articulated four-wheel drive tractors for Minneapolis Moline. And I've seen pictures of wooden models that he carved in order to pitch the idea to Moline. And basically his concept was, other people have articulated four-wheel drive tractors, and you know, we could too, using existing parts. And that was a big thing that he pushed, like with his model. The 2455, 2655, if you look at them, are made with a lot of the, you know, Moline parts that they already had on the shelf. And very much the same later with these two tractors. You know, they tried to use stuff that they already had. So after, of course, the merger between, you know, when White bought Cockshut and Minneapolis Moline, eventually in time things were not getting friendly as far as colors go. You know, people didn't want to sell tractors that weren't their preferred color, and so that eventually led White to the genius idea of they were just going to pick a neutral color, which was gray, and that's how we ended up with the gray tractors. So that was probably about, it was 1975, I believe, when the you know, the gray started to come into the scene, because the 4150 was actually the very first gray Field Boss tractor that they offered. And then the next year there were more in the line, and then, you know, the year after that there pretty well wasn't any meadow green stuff left, other than things I'm sure that were still on dealer lots and inventory at the factory. But if you look at the full line catalogs, you can kind of gradually watch the fade out of the meadow green. So Mike also was the engineer on this project of the 4150, and there's pictures. I'll try to find pictures. There's pictures of the prototype of this tractor, actually meadow green, and kind of interesting to see where that could have went. But if you look at these two tractors, what's different of them versus tractors, four-wheel drive tractors of other makes, and also even the, you know, Minneapolis Moline 2455, 2655, the A4Ts. The other four-wheel drive tractors are much higher up in the air, and these tractors are low down. And the idea was row crop four-wheel drive tractors. I always heard, and somebody can back me up or argue with me on this, that their thinking was that these were going to be the future of farming. People were going, not front wheel assist. People were going to buy articulated four-wheel drive row crop tractors because you got all this traction. And of course, like the 4150, adjustable axles, so you've got, you know, just like your row crop tractors, you've got a lot of choices. So I suppose we will start with the 4150 since it came first. And it was introduced, I was thinking that they introduced it to the dealers in '74, and then it was available in production for '75. There's a lot of different variations of literature and advertisements on these because they were super proud of this, you know, new idea I guess they had of low down articulated tractor. If you look at them again, they are in line. The engine is in line with the transmission and the drive shafts. There's no drop boxes like a lot of other four-wheel drive tractors, and that was something they hit pretty hard in the literature when they were talking about it. So anyway, if you collect other stuff, there's a lot of literature and things, different variations and pamphlets on these articulated tractors because they thought that was going to be the future of the whole affair. So the 4150 was built from '74 to '78. I've got my dates written down here. So yes, '74 to '78, and then the 4180 was '75 to '78. It came out later by not that much, you know. Like I said, the first year I think they didn't make as many units, but then the next years it was full on production. So we look at the two tractors side by side, and you know, it's hard to just say, hey, what's the difference? Because a lot of people are going to look at them and say they're identical. Well, there are some similarities. The body styling is similar, so that is one. And then the other thing is the engine. They both use a 3208 Caterpillar engine. And really, other than that, the similarities stop there. And I can tell you this from experience, especially from working on that one, because the 4180 is a totally different animal than anything you've encountered. So the 4150, if you want to visualize it in terms of green tractors, it would be like if you took a couple 1955s and hooked them together and made a four-wheel drive tractor, whereas the 2255 would be the version that would be the 4180. So you'd have like a couple of those rear ends coupled together to make this one. And it's not just straightforward as that. There are oddities about this. I've explained it when I was working on the transmission lube pump in the back half of that one. The direction that stuff travels is so weird in that tractor, and the reason is the 4150 uses the hydraul shift over under 3-speed, just like in the row crop tractors. They didn't feel it was heavy duty enough yet for this one, so they didn't put it in there. They put in a gear-to-gear 2-speed gearbox that you have to stop and shift. You know, you can't shift on the go like this. So this tractor, as a result, when the power leaves the over-under, it's the same way like it would be in the row crop tractors, but since this rear end is backwards, that ring gear has to be flipped over so that this turns the wheels the right way in the gears. Otherwise you'd have 6 reverse gears and only 2 forward gears. And then as it leaves there, it I got to think about this because I even confused myself. It's running that backwards, but it's still spinning. The straight through shaft, I believe, is still spinning the same way. So that means this rear end is just like the back half of a tractor. It's the same direction, except it's got no transmission gears in it. So that it's less confusing than this other one. This other one, because of its quirks, the 2-speed gearbox actually turns opposite of engine rotation when it comes out of here. So in order to make this work, then, because it turns opposite of engine rotation, this rear end should be set up just like the row crop tractors, and everything is turning the same way, the ring gear's in the same place. But then as it leaves here, that would make this one be going backwards. So this one is opposite, so that it goes the same way as the front half. And I'm telling you what, in there is a ball of sadness, because everything is just crammed in there due to flipping that over. It has a special lube pump because of that, and there's tight quarters in there. There's just not a lot of maneuverability in there. You know, I fixed that lube pump without having to totally gut the rear end, but it was a struggle. And it's all because of the fact that it changes direction so strangely. So what I'm saying is, by the point of this, essentially, other than engine and sheet metal, they're two totally different tractors underneath, not even close. I mean, alike. So the smaller one, 4150, of course, like I said, it would be more along the lines of like two 1955s hooked together, has adjustable tread axles, and it's just exactly like the tractors. The only difference is this articulation joint that was put in here. And you can, you know, maybe I should go to the other side where we can see it unobstructed, but essentially, you know, that is the only really unique piece they had to make this go, was some way to pivot the thing. And so they made that piece. You know, you can see bolts to both transmissions. And then I kind of feel like they went backwards in design on this. The top half of this articulation joint is these two links, and then your steering arm pivot, and it only has one steering cylinder. Both of them are the same way in this regard. But if you look at the A4Ts, they actually were pinned at the bottom and the top, and I think that was a lot stronger joint. And then the later four-wheel drives, like the 4175, 4210, etc., on down the line, they went back to a different articulation joint, because this was very kind of the not best part of these tractors. It was kind of prone to problems in their own way. The thinking was that they were trying to make these tractors be able to flex, and that's in the literature too. I'll have to look up, you know, how many degrees they said they were hoping to flex, but you can see, you know, what they were after. The other day when we were working on it, I had it in such a way where you could see how it was flexing, and that's what they were up to. But like I said, it was not without its failures. The pivot pin was updated. This is the earlier style, consequently. It is a straight pin all the way through, and it was updated. We'll look at the other one. It was updated to a big tapered pin, and it had four like 1/2-inch bolts to hold the pin down in there. But anyway, there's a service bulletin telling how to do field service and change yours over to this style, and this is the later style. Likewise, there were changes in the upper pin the same way, different things to make it heavier and try to fix the problems they were having. There is a lot of service updates on these two tractors, because you can tell they were learning what they were doing. Nobody was doing something quite like this. And really, I don't think anybody made a row crop four-wheel drive until like the very late 70s, when International made the 2+2. It was considered a row crop four-wheel drive because it had adjustable axles and whatnot. But up until that time, really everybody else was building, you know, high up, heavy tillage four-wheel drives, and that, you know, they had their own share of problems because they had drop boxes and things that, you know, caused other sadness. Another big point of not the best design, I guess you'd say, or I don't know really how else you would do it, that is where the drop boxes came in on other manufacturers' tractors, is you have full engine speed on that top drive shaft, and there was a lot of failure with those. The actual later tractors were updated to a heavier drive shaft, And I believe, according to the service bulletins, they are in fact interchangeable. The drive shaft on the 4210 was the service update drive shaft for these, and they're much heavier built when you look at them. They're in there and they're just connected with flanges, and you know, this one's got a replaced drive shaft on it, so that can be done if it has to be. And they kind of do after a while, because there's a lot of flexing and different things, more so than it would have on, like I said, the later tractors. If they have 2 articulation pins, if you just think about that, there would be less motion like this on them, because it would hold the tractor more square all the time, at least in my mind. That's what, so you get extra forces on these because it has the ability to flex more. And like I said, that had its good points and bad points, but they were learning. They had never done anything like this before. So this was the first one, and like I said, hydraulic shift, adjustable axles, pretty well exactly what you were used to if you were driving your shiny new 1955. I mean, everything's the same. Hydraulics, 3-point hitch. These are 1,000 only PTO, which can be remedied by getting a PTO unit off of a 2255. And you say, why 2255? Well, Caterpillar engine runs a different speed, so if you want it to run the same speed, you really need to find one out of one of those. You can see the heritage of the Minneapolis Moline design in the cab. It's very similarly shaped to the A4T cabs, and that design pretty well remained unchanged till the end of the white 4-wheel drive tractors. But it is a nice tractor to drive. I like driving these probably more than I like driving the front wheel assist tractors, mainly because of turning radius. You can turn these almost on a dime. I mean, I think the literature, it was just over 15 feet, 15 point some feet radius that you could turn these in. And it's definitely noticeable if you're out there in the field doing different things. The 4180, I guess we'll jump over here because we've been focusing on the other one, since it is more along the lines of the 2255, has the outboard planetaries on the axles, which camera got too hot, sorry. But anyway, as I was saying, outboard planetaries transfer, you know, a lot of the load, the stress on the axle to the outside, and it doesn't tear up stuff as much. So that's the benefit of that. And they figured higher horsepower, you know, 180 horsepower, 150 horsepower, thought it would help. But when you look at them, you know, other than the physical transmission size of the case difference, the two tractors are very physically similar. And I'm not going to say, I'd have to look in the parts book. I don't know if that articulation joint is exactly the same, or if there were two versions of it, one for the smaller and one for the larger, but they're made identically. There's no difference. Same way here. The only real difference, which you can't see because it's got the quick hitch on, is these have fixed balls, whereas the 4150 is the claws like the other tractors had. So basically, that's the difference. This is considered a category 2 or 3 hitch, I think, and so it's heavy duty is what it is. They both use the external lift cylinders, which was always known as like the 6,000 pound lift hitch. But the hydraulic system is just basically identical. Options were the fender fuel tanks, and that would add to your fuel capacity. Main tank on these, I believe, is 94 or 5 gallons, and then each fender would add 39 more gallons to that, so you could hold quite a bit of fuel. But these will drink quite a bit of fuel, so you kind of needed it. I want to say that, like, using this one, maybe 4 or 5 hours is what you can get off of the underhood tank. I guess it just depends what you're doing and how hard you're working it. But I mean, I guess when you think of the amount of work that you're getting done, Anyway, my point is, as long as you're using an appropriately sized implement where you're getting the maximum work done, the fuel efficiency is pretty good compared to the amount of work you're getting done, is what I'm trying to say. You know, if you were pulling a 10-foot disc with this, you would probably be burning a lot more fuel than you were getting work done. But if you're pulling the maximum thing you can to a point where you're not just beating it to death, then the fuel efficiency is not too bad. Now, I'm trying to think of more things that we could talk about because people will ask. Basically, I mean, everything's identical except the stuff that's not. And like I said, the body styling and the engine are the same. And the body styling is kind of the brainchild of, his name was Larry Shinoda. And he came from Ford Motor Company. And that is how come we have the Boss, Field Boss, because he's the same guy who came up with the Boss Mustang. And so that's how we get the Boss. He was a hire that got brought along as a result of good old Bunky Knudsen. Everybody wonders why I say Knudsen. Well, Bunky came along, and he's the kind of the person who killed the green paint in a way, because he brought Shinoda along and came up with this idea to use the neutral color, and that's how we got this striping styling and the Boss name and the what almost looks like a Lincoln Continental hood ornament on them. That was all the work of Shinoda. So yeah, old Bunky came along, and he was not, how do I say this in a nice way? There's really not a nice way to say what I think about that, because I really feel like he is the one who killed the green paint. I mean, he did a lot of stuff to the companies that were taken over, like Cockshed and Minneapolis Moline, as in just practically destroying them and bringing everybody together. But the thing that he didn't do or wise up on, which I think was a big flaw, was the green tractors had a bigger percentage of the market share. So, you know, I'm no expert, but that is the color that they should have used. They should have kept the meadow green and clover white, because people associated with that more than this strange new neutral color. And, you know, such is life. The fact of business is, you don't even have to have a great product if you've got a great marketing team. And other tractor companies have figured that out by slapping their logo on, you know, socks and women's underwear and mugs and hats and things that have nothing to do with farming, and they make millions of dollars a year off of branding. And that was a big mistake, in my opinion, because they lost the opportunity. They had a well-established brand, and they kind of forsook that, and they went in this different direction, and had to spend a lot of money on marketing to kind of get this into people's brains that this was the continuation of the green tractors and the yellow tractors and the red tractors. And I just think they could have probably maintained a little better had they stuck with a color that everybody was used to and was selling, you know, fairly well. So I'm supposing that there will be people who argue that with me, but basically that is the rendition of how we got this body styling. Because when you see it, you think it has nothing to do with the previous styling of any of the tractors, and that was kind of the point. They didn't want to favor anybody over anybody else, so they picked a neutral color, and then they let Shinoda go wild on the styling and try to make it sleek, and you know, that's what they did. Now, after having been around them for years, the styling has grown on me, and they are a continuation of the green tractors, even though you see some of those concept photos, and it would have been pretty cool to see what they would have done with these in meadow green. But you know, they are very much underneath Oliver's. I mean, and the same guys that were building the green ones built these, so you can't forsake them too hard. You know, all the white tractors are basically the continuation of the green tractors, because underneath, that's what they are. And in the first years, like when they were rolling this out, a lot of the white stuff was repainted Oliver stuff. The implements, the same exact implements, just painted red. And you know, they eventually phased into their own stuff and different designs, heavier stuff over the years, like this field cultivator, you know. That was something that came much later and was designed and was only available as a white. It never existed in the time of the green tractors. But yeah, a lot of the stuff was similar. I'm just rambling, but I'm trying to figure out where I was all going with this. But my point was, for example, like the 270 is a 1655 in silver sheet metal. There is absolutely zero difference underneath the sheet metal between it and a 1655. So yeah, don't look down your noses at the silver tractors, because they are part of the family, and you know, basically Oliver's underneath. But you can see more and more as the years went on the influence that they were pulling from all three companies in some of the different designs. We'll take a little walk over here and look at a newer tractor. The old 9650 over here. Everybody always says, why would you have an orange tractor? Well, because underneath it's a white tractor. It's a white tractor with a Deutz engine. And this rear end, minus the power shift transmission, is basically the rear end that was in the 2135, 2155. Very similar design. And then like my point I was making about how they started, you know, borrowing ideas from the other brands they took over. Moline Dan noticed that right away when he came here, was that is very similar to the Moline style hub that they were using. So by the time they were building, you know, 2135s and what have you, they were using ideas from the other tractors manufacturers. And just like the a lot of those early whites were Olivers, some of them were basically Molines underneath. Like the 2150 was basically a Moline underneath, kind of a hybrid Moline, I guess you'd say, because it used, I'm pretty sure that's the one that used the 585 engine. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. And then the back half was Oliver. But yeah, just because they're a different color, underneath they could really be something else, and that's what this is too. Now, as a collector, I think it's kind of neat to have both of these. Practically, probably maybe not so much, but I just think it's neat to have one of each size. I like collecting things, and it always bothers me if there's a series and I don't have all the things. But having both is pretty cool. Time will tell how good this one is in the field, or how useful, because we haven't done anything in the field with it yet. But it will definitely be handy to have around as another tractor that can pull higher horsepower implements. And that's always good to have a backup, because as we learned that one year, I thought having two would be enough, and both the 4180 and the 9650 were broken at the same time. So I had to switch back to, you know, 12 and 15 foot implements with smaller tractors. And yeah, if you're in a time crunch, that's really not the thing to do. So anyway, I don't know that this turned out as well as I had it worked out in my head, but hopefully you've gathered some of the differences in these two tractors. They're very similar, but in the same regard, they're very different. And I like them both, and I do like the hydraul shift. That is one thing, if I had to change about that 4180, I wish they had put the hydraul shift in it. Eventually they did come out with a heavy duty hydraul shift, and that was in all the other, like the 4210s, and that had that. And that makes a big difference. People might think, why? Well, when you're trying to start an implement from a dead stop, it's awfully handy to be able to shift on the go, versus having to just leave your implement up out of the ground and then slowly let it down, you know, so you don't lose speed. That's one thing about the Caterpillar engines. They start really well in the cold. I have to say, it impresses me how well the 4180 has always started in the cold. But they're a good amount of power until you lug them down. If you don't keep them screaming, they fall on their face. You might get 200 or 300 RPM drop and you're fine, but then it just all goes away. So that is where having the shift on the go would be super handy for stuff like that. But anyway, I'm trying to come up, I don't know what else to say. Both of these tractors are on 23/134s, which is kind of unusual to find two that are on the big tires. And they are the same size, even though those are brand new and they look much taller than these. They're the same. I did learn, looking at the parts book, that if you bought a 4150 and you ordered it with the 23/134s, you got this wheel center, which looks more like the 50 series wheel center. And if you got the 18/434s or 38s, whatever, you got the wheel center that looked like on the 55 series tractors with the riser blocks. And the only thing I can think of is they must have thought the wider tire would be more strain, so they wanted the heavier center. I don't know. I don't know why they did that. Anyway, I really can't answer why, but you know, maybe they had a bunch of the 50 series centers left over, but they're different because they have more bolt holes, which could easily be added in. But if I had to guess, I would say it was something to do with the more rigidity of this, but that's purely my speculation, so don't take that to the bank. But anyway, each one has their benefits and each one has their drawbacks, but they're still both pretty neat. And I enjoy driving them. Like I said, they definitely give you the feeling of power when you drive them. I mean, they sound wicked and you just feel like you got something there. Pretty good throttle response from them. But like I said, you just have to keep them up in the RPMs or you will have it fall on its face, which is kind of the plight of a V8 versus a 6-cylinder engine anyway. Even in cars, V8s, they have a lot of horsepower at high RPMs, whereas your 6-cylinder engines have a lot of lugging power at low RPMs. So each one has their advantages in that respect, you know, and you can prove that out on the highway. I know in school buses, I had a school bus that was a V8, and if you kept it up like on the interstate, it was fine. It wasn't slow. I mean, it kept up with everybody. It was great. But if you got in town, stop and go traffic, it took forever to get moving. And we went on a field trip one time and another guy had a 6-cylinder Cummins in his bus, and he could get off the, not I'm gonna say the starting line in a school bus, but from the stoplight he could get going instantly and go, and it took me forever to get, you know, wound up to where I needed to be. But then when we got on the interstate, I could drive easily and keep up with things and whatever, and he struggled to maintain the same speed and stuff. So it's just the difference in a V8 versus a 6-cylinder is what I'm saying. And through no fault of its own, that's the way it is. You know, I often wonder, I've heard people repowering these with different things. It would be interesting to drive one that was repowered with a, you know, a big 6-cylinder diesel of some variety. But I'm afraid if you started getting too much horsepower, you'd probably chew the rear ends up in them. So they probably knew what they were doing for the time. They definitely learned a lot, because the later white 4-wheel drives were pretty spectacular in my opinion. I've always kind of wanted a 4210 because I had some friends who had one when I was a kid. So maybe someday we'll add that to the line. I like these 4-wheel drive articulated tractors, really of any make. I feel like they're overlooked in the collecting world, probably a lot because of the physical size and the limits of storing them and different things like that, you know. They're more surface area to clean and paint if you were going to restore one, but boy did they look cool at shows, you know. All of them, old Versatiles and Steigers, and you know, they're just neat old tractors. They're part of agriculture history, and you know, they seem to be one of the first things to get left behind when people update. Nobody wants an old 4-wheel drive anymore. So yeah, pretty cool. And I definitely could tuck myself into a four-wheel drive tractor collection, but I'm not actively seeking anything. Things just find me, and that's kind of how this, you know, happened to be. So if you haven't heard before how they came to live here, the 4180 I bought on an auction probably in about 2000 and I don't know, 16, 17, 18, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was just up the road here. Same consignment auction like where I bought the super cheap Super Duty. And there were two of them actually on that same day. Another one showed up that had singles, or not singles, but it had 18.4s with duals. And this one had the super singles. And the other one did not sell. The guy would not let it sell. He wanted a ridiculous amount of money for. That one I gave $4,000 for and drove it home. And since then we have done much things to it over the years, including putting about $8,000 or $9,000 worth of tires on it. So that's no fun and not something I look forward to on this one. But this is the most recent purchase. Not anymore though. I did buy a Fiat since this, but as far as four-wheel drive tractor purchases go, this is the most recent one. I bought it about a month ago. This would be 2024. Bought it about, oh, what, the 6th of July, because I had heard about it earlier in the year and the old guy died. Somebody told me the family wanted to sell stuff and I should come look at it. But then I got a message and they said they want $12,000 for it. And I said, I'm not even gonna go look at it because we're way far apart. Well, then I got a phone call on the 4th of July and a guy said, hey, you better go over there because it looks like they're having an auction. So I drove the next day, talked to the auctioneer. He was having an auction on Saturday. And so I drove back and waited almost all day for this. And $2,100 later, we were driving it home. And it indeed did make it home. And now we have had many videos on trying to make it a little more better. We're getting down to cosmetics. We have a lot of rust issues in the cab floor to take care of, and the cab is probably the worst part of the whole thing, which understandably so. If you didn't know, all of the front hoods and all that stuff is fiberglass, so it stays nicer in a way, but it also doesn't because the vibration kills it and it's harder to keep things from cracking. And yeah, so it would have been nice had they made that out of steel as well, but you know, things have their drawbacks. What are you gonna do? I'm sure that it was a cost-cutting measure, or maybe it had to do with lightweightness. I don't know. That's another thing I guess we can say real quick about them being designed. They were designed to be when they were under a load, a 50-50 split. I think if I remember correctly, just sitting here statically, it's 65-35 split, with the front having most of the weight, but then when you put them under a load pulling, it splits the load 50-50, and that's what they were after. So they did put a lot of thought into these, but like I said, they learned a lot along the way too, because they are a lot less refined than the later ones when you see them compared to it. So anyway, I don't know that this was interesting or useful, but it's kind of neat seeing them both side by side, and there's probably not many places that can do that. So yeah, hopefully you got something out of this, and look forward to more videos of these in the future because they will be in the field. And until then, I guess we'll leave this one here, so I'll see you next time. Do you suffer from low intelligence and are easily entertained? Well then hit that thumbs up button and leave a comment, and that way we can keep making entertainment that your feeble minds can understand. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.